Hey, welcome back to another episode of Farm Your Yard. I'm Carrie. Today we're out in my garden and we're going to talk about how to care for your tomatoes in the summertime. So tomatoes are like everyone's favorite or almost favorite backyard garden vegetable, and everyone always has a lot of questions on how to keep your tomato plants growing and producing very productively over the season. So today I'm going to talk about 3 things that are good maintenance tasks to do with your tomato plants that are also like preventative in keeping your plants safe from diseases and pest pressure, and happy and healthy and bearing you lots of tomatoes. So let's dive right in. The first thing that is very important and that you should do actually after you initially plant your tomato plants in the garden is somehow provide them some sort of system that they can grow vertically up. Tomatoes naturally would grow right along the ground and they would root in multiple places all along the ground, and it'd be a pretty short plant. And the tomatoes would grow kind of in the foliage right along the ground. Well, that doesn't really work for us here in mid-Missouri because we have pretty humid summers, and so we need to get the plant up off the ground to facilitate good air circulation around the plant. If the plant doesn't have good air circulation, we often have fungal issues and other disease pressure that will just travel all along the foliage of the plant and weaken your plant's productivity. So making a cage like I did out of this field fence that I got from any hardware store, and then I just cut and made into a 1.5 foot diameter cylinder, and then slid that right over my plants, is a really easy way to keep your plants lifted up off the ground for the rest of the summer. So it is about a month or so after I transplanted the tomatoes. When I transplanted them, they were about this tall, and so they grow quite fast. What's going to end up happening over the year is that they will top out up here, but then they'll continue growing, but they'll kind of cascade down. So by October, November, when they're about to die with the first frost, the top of the plant will actually be hanging kind of down here. But it will still be hoisted off the ground and have more air circulation around the plant. There's a couple main ways that you hoist the plant off the ground. The first is caging. Caging is probably the easiest because you put the cage on it and then you're set for the rest of the season. We also have another way that we are going to show you how to hoist your plants off the ground that works really well if you have a lot of plants and you want to be a little more economical than, say, making cages for every single plant. So let's go check that out. So this is another way that you can get your plants up off the ground if you have a whole bunch of them. This is the way we predominantly grow our tomatoes at the Veterans Urban Farm and at Columbia's Agriculture Park and at the Kilgore's Community Garden. We get a few T-posts, and in this case I have a T-post, and then I planted 3 tomato plants, and then another T-post, 3 tomato plants, T-post, 3 tomato plants. And then once a week for several weeks I take this twine and I weave it in between the plants, kind of hoisting them up over the season. It's really important to keep up with this weekly if you choose this method of trellising. If you skip a week and they grow, let's say, a foot in 2 weeks, it becomes much harder to tie them up than if you just do it every 7 days until they grow taller than the T-posts. The shorter they are, the easier it is to weave in between them. If they're tall and flopped over and leaning on each other, it becomes more and more difficult and more time consuming. So for this, what you need is some twine, like I have in this bucket, and a pair of scissors. So I just tie a double knot around the T-post right above one of the nubs of the T-post. All right. And then I'm going to go down one side of my tomatoes, and this tomato, I'm going to put the piece of twine on this side of the tomato. On its neighbor, I'm going to put the piece of twine on the other side of the tomato. So kind of weave in and around them. And then this final tomato over here, I'm going to put it on the opposite side of that I did on this tomato. So you kind of just weave in and around the tomatoes. Then I wrap it around the T-post and go back the way I came, except on my second pass through, I do the twine on the opposite side of the plant. So for this plant, my first pass I had the twine on my side of the plant. Now I'm going to put the twine on this closer side of the plant. This is actually a different plant. Boom. And now I'm done with the twining. I'm just going to cut it off, wrap it around a couple times, make sure it's nice and tight, and then I'm done. And I just come back to it next week and do the same thing. There you go, not too bad. And now that I did it, you can see that this tomato, which originally was kind of leaning on this closer tomato over here, now is more upright and has more air circulation between the two, which is what we're hoping for. Let's talk about watering. Watering is also very important in keeping all of your vegetable plants happy over the summertime, but especially for plants like tomatoes, which can get something called blossom end rot, which is where the bottom of the tomato gets like a black necrotic looking spot. Blossom end rot happens because the plant has a hard time taking up calcium from the soil. That might lead you to think that you might need to put some fertilizer with calcium down if you see blossom end rot on your tomatoes, but that's really not the root cause of the issue. The root cause of something like blossom end rot, which does affect a lot of gardeners over the summer season, is inconsistent watering. So it's really important for things like tomatoes, peppers, summer squash, things that are susceptible to blossom end rot, to water them as consistently as you can. The swings from very dry soil to very wet soil is what kind of makes it hard for the plant to take the calcium out of the soil, which then results in blossom end rot. So I want to talk real quick about how to water thoroughly and deeply while also keeping a lot of water off of your plant. Because while you do want to water consistently, you also don't want to get your leaves wet. Like we were saying before with the air circulation and hoisting your plants off the ground, they really do prefer to be dry with a lot of air moving in between them and around them. So what I like to do is I use my hose and then I just water just the base of the plant, like so. But before I water, I always check the soil moisture. So to check the soil moisture, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick my finger into the soil and check to see what it looks like when I pull it out. Okay, so this is what I come out with. You can see that my finger has some moist soil in it, but not a whole lot. So I think I'm going to water this, and I want to show you how to water it accurately. So I'm going to take my hose nozzle and I'm just going to put it down right next to the base of the plant. I'm just going to water, I usually count to like 30 or something in my head, and then you just let it soak in for another 30 seconds, and then I'm going to test it again to see if it's moister, and if it is, I'm good. Okay, so now I'm going to stick my finger back in and let's see if it looks more moist when I pull it out. So now this is what my finger looks like after just that amount of watering. So this is really how you should test to see if your soil is moist enough before and after watering really anything in your garden, but especially something like tomatoes, which are sensitive to inconsistent watering. It is important to note, after that demonstration of watering technique and how to keep the water, directed only at the roots and not, getting all the leaves wet, that watering very deeply but less frequently is really important, especially for something like tomatoes. So if you water very deeply, let's say like soak the soil 6 to 10 inches down, but only do that once a week, once every 10 days. That forces the plant's roots to grow deeper naturally in search of water. And the deeper the roots grow, the stronger and sturdier the plant on its own becomes. If you water every other day, just enough so that the top couple inches are moist, the roots are going to stay up, kind of shallowly buried, which is going to make them more susceptible to droughts and hot temperatures, and even less structurally stable. So while I do just want to mention that while we did just go over a watering demonstration, I almost hardly ever water my tomatoes in my garden unless it's an extremely dry year. One of the things that helps you water less frequently and also protects the plants from soil-borne diseases is using mulch in your garden. So in my garden, I use leaves that we collect every fall from our neighborhood. At many of our gardens around town that CCUA manages, like the Columbia Agriculture Park and the Veterans Urban Farm, we use herbicide-free straw that we buy from a local family farm. The importance of straw mulch, leaf mulch, is that it keeps the top of the soil a little bit cooler, which makes the soil biotic community happier because they're not baked and scorching and like thirsty. They're a little more shaded and damp and have water to drink. And also it keeps more water around the roots for longer. So it helps you water less. And it keeps all that water there in the soil instead of evaporating out on a hot, dry day that we always get in the summertime here. I like to make sure that the mulch is so thick that you can't see the soil at all underneath of it. That helps keep the soil from splashing up onto the leaves in a bad rainstorm that we might have in the summertime. And the reason why you want to protect the leaves of the plants from the soil is because there are a lot of soil-borne pathogens here in Missouri that really do a number on the tomato plants. And once the soil, rain falls from the sky, it splashes on the soil splashes onto the bottom lower leaf, and there's a soil-borne pathogen on that soil. It starts to affect the leaf, and then it travels all the way down the stem to the main stem of the plant and then travels up the plant. So if you see yellowing leaves that are moving from the bottom of the plant upward, that is most likely some sort of soil-borne pathogen that is affecting your plant. It happens to the best gardener pretty much every year, just because tomatoes are a little sensitive to a lot of the disease pressure we have here. But one way to keep your plants well watered, cool, keep their roots cool, and keep the soil-borne pathogens off of them is by mulching very thickly. I really love my summer tomatoes, and I bet you do too. So I hope that this video was helpful in your care regimen for your tomatoes this summer so that you get lots of delicious backyard grown tomatoes. As always, I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you next time. Bye.